Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for coming. We are so pleased you could join us for today's keynote address in our Critical Conversations program. Now, this program is in its fifth year, and it was created as a catalyst for campus discussions on major questions and challenges facing our world today, from global health concerns and technological trends to socioeconomic challenges and contemporary cultural and political debates. Beyond initiating a dialogue, this program is meant to inspire us to think in new ways to solve problems, initiate new partnerships and collaborations, and explore different perspectives and ideas. That is why we are so pleased and honored to welcome this year's distinguished scholar to talk about a topic that is of critical interest to so many of us here today: why research universities matter. President of the Association of American Universities, Dr. Sue Coleman, is a leading national voice and advocate for higher education in the US. In fact, she's in Washington at a very interesting time, and Sue took the job, probably not knowing how interesting it's going to be, and she's working 24 hours a day on our behalf, on the behalf of the AAU institutions of the country. She has a distinguished and extensive career in academia. President of the University of Michigan from 2002 to 2014, and president of University of Iowa from 1995 to 2002. Before becoming a university president, Dr. Coleman served as Vice Chancellor for Research and Graduate Education at the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill, and Provost at the University of New Mexico. As an academic, Dr. Coleman distinguished herself as a scholar and a teacher of biochemistry on the faculty of the University of Kentucky. Recognized nationally and internationally for her scholarly excellence, Dr. Coleman was elected to the National Academy of Medicine and is a fellow of both the American Association of Advancement of Science and American Academy of Arts and Sciences. Given the many challenges facing higher education in recent years, Dr. Coleman's participation in this year's Critical Conversation program could not be more appropriate and timely. These challenges include demonstrating the value of a degree, pushing for increased access and opportunity for our students and faculty, advocating for funding at the state and federal level, and demonstrating our impact in the many communities we serve. Higher education institutions, especially research-intensive universities like UB, are critical catalysts for thriving knowledge-based economies. We do this in many ways through the impact of our research, education, and discovery, and interdisciplinary research our scholars pursue is often conducted collaboratively with peers from other major research universities and receives the support of major federal grants that allow us to tackle issues in our backyard and on a global scale. Some examples include biochemistry, a $25 million Science and Technology Center grant from the National Science Foundation to create a biochemistry center to transform the field of structural biology, including drug development using X-ray lasers. CTSA, our National Institute of Health Clinical and Translational Science Award to advance critical medical breakthroughs. The Women's Health Initiative, a decades-long NIH study of which UB is one of the original vanguard clinical centers that has yielded major discoveries on chronic diseases affecting women. Across the disciplines, scholars at UB and other major research universities are leading the way in the discoveries and innovation that will have a profound and enduring impact on all aspects of society. from healthcare and life sciences to advanced manufacturing and material science, from information technology to the arts and culture. That is why we are so excited to welcome Dr. Coleman to our campus today. Her visit represents a great opportunity for all of us to gain a broader perspective on many important issues. I also want to take this opportunity to thank Dr. Ravin Sulsi, who has agreed to help facilitate the question and answer session after today's keynote. I would encourage all of you who have joined us today to attend tomorrow's panel discussion as well. It promises to be a lively conversation on higher education in 21st century, and one that I am sure will greatly benefit our campus community. In the meantime, we are delighted to have Dr. Coleman here today to further our conversation on the impact and importance of Research University. It is now my pleasure to introduce our distinguished guest, Sue Coleman. Sue.
Thank you. Thanks, Satish. Thank you. Well, good afternoon. And thank you, Satish, for that introduction, and to the University at Buffalo for inviting me to participate in the Critical Conversation series. It's already been a fun and interesting day talking to various constituents on the campus. I'm also excited about the discussions that I'll have later today and tomorrow, and I look forward to the questions that you might want to engage after I speak to you for a few minutes. As president of the Association of American Universities, I am privileged to represent 62 of the finest public and private research universities in the United States and Canada. This includes the University at Buffalo, which was elected into the AAU in 1989 and was the first public university in New York State to join our organization. The AAU also includes two institutions where I served as president, the University of Michigan and the University of Iowa. I believe deeply in the power of AAU universities to make a difference, as evidenced by their presence in any and all serious rankings of the world's leading universities. From Harvard to Johns Hopkins to Texas and Washington, these research universities foster innovation, they attract and advance talent, and improve the quality of our lives. 1 of every 3 Nobel Prize winners comes from an AAU institution. 7 of every 10 National Medal of Science recipients are at AAU institutions. More than any other higher education organization, AAU members have the most in common. We represent the nation's best universities, period. I'm here today, though, not only as AAU president. I'm here as a former university president and as a scientist. I'm here as a grandparent and citizen who wants a prosperous, educated world for future generations. We're all here because of our belief in and concern for higher education and its essential role in society. American higher education, particularly public higher education, is one of the monumental achievements of our country. President Thomas Jefferson was rightfully adamant that a cornerstone of democracy is education for all, from the richest to the poorest. Higher education is a public good. I'd like to share a snapshot from an earlier generation of a university president from an AAU institution. Lotus Kaufman led the University of Minnesota in the years following World War I. Through the rise of cities, the foreclosing of farms, the deep budget cuts to his university, and then came the Great Depression. He experienced a lot as president. President Kaufman liked to tell this story of Adam and Eve. As they walked in the Garden of Eden, Adam remarked to Eve, "You must understand, my dear, that we are living through a period of transition." Such is life in the American university. Some 90 years after President Kaufman began his presidency, we are indeed in a period of transition. In this country and around the world, higher education and its research universities are a public good lacking public support. I want to explore that today by looking backward a bit, as well as offering some thoughts about the future of American higher education. The current landscape is a ravaged one for America's public universities and colleges. In a 15-year span, starting in the year 2000, investment by our state governments in public higher education declined 30%. 30%. That is an ominous start to the 21st century, and a large step backward in a nation aiming for the highest proportion of college graduates in the world by 2020. If we look at the funding scenario that began in 2008 with the Great Recession, the data from across the country are pretty numbing. 44 states are spending less per student in the 2017 school year than in 2008. Public funding for higher education in Louisiana is down 45%. Pennsylvania is down 34%. Arizona's spending has declined 53%. A 53% decline since 2008. If the stock market trended like this, our nation would be in a dead panic. And yet, sadly, we are not. New York State, in a perverse way, is a bit of a leader with only 2% decline over the past decade. You're doing pretty well. Only 5 states are spending more than they were in 2008, and that's Indiana, Montana, Nebraska, North Dakota, and Wyoming. My friend Jonathan Cole, who served ably as provost of Columbia University and who has written extensively about the American university, does not mince words when assessing the landscape. This amounts to a pillaging of the country's great state universities. Many of our great state universities are also our great research universities. As government funding drops, the cost of education rises for students and families. At the same time, universities are forced to cut programs and services. They strive to remain affordable while potentially weakening their quality. These forces have left public universities in the U.S. increasingly compromised in our mission to move America forward. It is an unsustainable model for all involved. Just as damaging as the decline in financial support is the moral disinvestment. There is a skepticism about the value of a college degree, the purpose of a liberal arts education, and the validity of scientific research that is both troubling and disheartening. It is a skepticism that does not speak to our values as a democratic society that was the first in the world to offer free public K-12 education. The culture that we champion and the pursuit of truth that we hold sacrosanct have always made others a bit nervous or skeptical. With the Moral Act and the birth of land-grant universities in the 1860s, fathers and mothers in rural America, meaning mainstream America, feared the new agricultural schools would rob them of their sons. The idea of attending college to learn how to farm was anathema to everything that they knew. What their parents did not know, though, was that their sons and daughters would pursue science of soil, the nature of plant and livestock disease, animal husbandry, and more, and bring that knowledge back to the farm. Scientific research has made all the difference in our nation, and universities partnering with the federal government have led the way. And yet, some 155 years after the Moral Act and 375 years after the death of Galileo, we are once again debating the worthiness of science. If higher education and research we produce is not valued and supported at the state level and at the national level, we will stumble on the global stage. We must reiterate why universities matter. Higher education is a public good. We all embrace it and we promote it, but it cannot be said enough. Higher education is a public good. In this country, more than 85% of students who graduated from high school enroll in college within 8 years. 85% is a pretty staggering number, and one that we should take great pride in. When these students select a college or university, the vast majority, 80% of them, enroll in a public institution. There are currently more than 17 million undergraduate students in American higher education today, and 8 out of every 10 are matriculating at a public institution. In addition to public community colleges and regional universities, every state in the country has at least one public university recognized for its high or very high research activity. These are places like Wisconsin, Florida, Berkeley, and the University at Buffalo. Most states have 2, 3, or more of these high research activity institutions. Public universities really are the workhorses of American teaching and research, and the benefits to society are powerful. We know that university graduates will see greater financial success in their lifetime than a typical high school graduates, to the point that their earnings difference will far outpace the original cost of that degree. It's an impressive return on investment. And there are other benefits. People with a college or university degree are more likely to exercise, less likely to smoke, more likely to vote, and are the first to volunteer and give back to their communities. This is the story that we need to tell about our students, our discoveries, and our universities. To be silent, particularly in the current political environment, is to acquiesce. This is not the time for that. We must do a better job of explaining college affordability, the role of federal student aid, and our research and the critical role that it plays in improving lives. And we must challenge ourselves, really challenge ourselves, to explain the impact and importance of university research. And I'm as guilty of this as anyone else, of not doing it right. At Michigan, I was always proud to share the news that the university had conducted record levels of research, some $1.3 billion annually. I was always pleased to talk about the university's successful fundraising campaign and its growing endowment. But how do taxpayers hear these numbers? We may sound like for-profit organizations enriching ourselves. So we need to break it down. We must explain how we create jobs, how we support business by purchasing supplies, how fundraising and endowment support students, how our research develops the scientists, the social workers, the teachers, the physicians that we send to the world. I truly believe that this is our biggest challenge, and we'd better take it seriously to better explain our work and to link it to American prosperity. Let me give you an example of how we can share the story better of investing in university research. When the federal government awards research dollars to universities, those funds support faculty, they support graduate students and postdoctoral fellows, clinicians, and other. We know all this. But the impact goes much, much further than most realize. Research requires equipment, technology, goods, and services, which means a research grant awarded here at UB or at the University of Oregon will benefit vendors across town and across the country. Researchers at the University of Michigan are using data, big data, to validate the economic and social effects of university research. They carried out a little experiment that's really quite interesting. They studied the spread of federal research spending at 15 universities that are located in 12 states. They tracked more than $2.2 billion in research spent in these 12 states and demonstrated they were able to track every dollar, how the dollars spread to vendors and contractors in more than 1,600 counties across the nation. That's 1,600 counties. In short, 1 out of every 2 counties in the country reaped the benefits of that university research that was conducted only at 15 universities. When plotting the spread of these dollars on a map, it really does look like measles have broken out across the nation. It's an epidemic, but a very healthy one at that. University research not only delivers cures and answers, it also provides livelihoods to hundreds of thousands of people. All these data, from personal income of graduates to the nationwide vendor impact, are important to measure and to quantify. It validates the work that we do. Yet higher education, and we all know this, isn't a commodity. We're not the newest smartphone or the hybrid vehicle to hit the market, although we may have developed the technology behind it. In fact, if I see people checking their phones during my talk, I simply remind myself that a university brought us the touch screen, to which we're all addicted now. But higher education really exists for our mission, is to serve the public. We do have a compact with society, and especially the citizens of our states, to work on their behalf and to promote the greater good. Earlier this week, I was on the campus of the University of Virginia, which, like UB, is an AAU member. UVA is, of course, Mr. Jefferson's university. Thomas Jefferson loved it so much that he wanted his headstone to say that he was the university's founder. That he had been president of the United States was of no matter. Jefferson was passionate about the necessity of public education in the new republic. He knew that democracy demanded an educated citizenry. Jefferson said he wanted his university to be, quote, worth patronizing with the public support and be a temptation to the youth of other states to come and drink of the cup of knowledge. Listen again to these words, worth patronizing with public support. This is what is at risk. The means to educate the broadest possible swath of our society for the betterment of society with full public support. I want to share what I see are the concerns that America's leaders must confront to prepare students for a global future. And not just leaders in higher education, but elected officials, business executives, and those who oversee foundations and nonprofit entities. First is access for students across a wide economic spectrum. Universities have traditionally been ladders of opportunity for citizens, particularly in the US, and engines of social mobility, as was most dramatically realized in the post-World War II period with the GI Bill. Inclusiveness is in the DNA of public higher education. I'm deeply concerned about the plight of public universities because of our ability and our obligation to educate students from all walks of life, particularly low-income, first-generation, and underrepresented students. We cannot lose sight of that, particularly as our society grows more diverse. We are now in an era when children from families with low incomes are much less likely to go to selective colleges and graduate. This is why one of our legislative priorities at AAU is to reform student aid and higher education tax provision to make higher education more affordable and ease debt burdens. A second concern is the way we fund our universities. In the United States, we have the paradox that the actual cost in universities have tracked slightly below the rate of consumer inflation, while who pays the bills has changed dramatically. Quite naturally, taxpayers feel this as runaway cost of education. People simply don't understand what is happening. In the last fiscal year, legislators in 34 states increased per student funding, These were baby steps, but they were baby steps in the right direction. 17 states, however, reduced their support. As I mentioned earlier, only 5 states have returned to funding levels above those of 2008 when the Great Recession struck. The bottom line is that the vast majority of our states continue to spend less on students than before the financial downturn. Finding new financial models will be important so that higher education is not viewed primarily as a private good. Collectively, we must correct the financial imbalances. States must develop alternative strategies besides cutting university funding to balance the state budget, which most are doing right now. At the same time, universities must find more efficient ways to operate and seek new revenue streams. At the federal level, we want to see a new era of research investment, a reliable 4% annual real growth in funding from NIH, NSF, and other key institutions. We're pushing for multi-agency initiatives and training programs to move more research into the marketplace. And we want to make research and education investments more efficient by streamlining or eliminating unnecessary and duplicative regulations and reporting. In addition to our federal partners, we must create public-private partnerships to sustain and strengthen research and education for the future. The private sector should acknowledge the importance of public research universities to the workforce by supporting scholarships and internships. And finally, we must be flexible as institutions that create and share knowledge. Our universities must keep academic disciplines relevant by encouraging faculty to assess constantly what they are teaching and why. The very nature of what we do in universities has changed. We must now teach students to be constantly flexible in applying and using knowledge rather than just cramming them with facts. I know this is a lengthy to-do list. We can and we must do better, all of us. I can't talk, though, about our research institutions without addressing the travel ban being pursued by the current administration. Our universities have worked closely with the federal government to protect the country from those who would harm us. We will continue to do so, and we want to help the administration ensure national security in ways that do not undermine our nation's status as a top destination for global talent. But the proposed ban is wrong-headed. It poses a fundamental, long-term threat to America's global leadership in higher education, research, and innovation. Among other things, it will limit entry of thousands of gifted students and faculty from countries like Chad, Iran, Libya, Somalia, Syria, Venezuela, Yemen, and yes, even North Korea. These students and scholars who wish to come to the United States to study, teach, and conduct cutting-edge research and scholarship. Perhaps most alarmingly, this order conveys a damaging message to talented people from the 8 affected countries, as well as others, that says this: you are no longer welcome here. This message is especially clear in the absence of a statement by the President that America needs to remain the destination of choice for the world's most talented students, scientists, engineers, and scholars. Our success, nationally and globally, is due in no small part to our ability to attract the very best students and faculty from both the United States and the nations of the world. The University at Buffalo rightly takes pride in being one of the top institutions in the country for enrolling international students. These students make UB a stronger university. And the fact that you are led by a scholar with an exceptional international portfolio demonstrates the value of global talent and expertise. Talent flow will become ever more important across the globe as it becomes ever more apparent that innovation and creativity are the new bedrock of economic success. In the past decade, we've seen a tectonic shift in international undergraduates seeking education in the United States. It's an increase that's been encouraged by many institutions to help with the financial constraints I've discussed, and by a drop in the U.S. high school population. Our country's economic competitiveness and global leadership would not be possible without the extraordinary flow of international talent that has been drawn here for many decades by economic opportunity and American values. To drink, as Thomas and Jefferson said, from the cup of knowledge. Actions that place our values and our status in doubt are likely to cause serious, lasting harm. One of our country's great higher education leaders was Clark Kerr of the University of California. He was the architect of a state system that became admired worldwide. He did so much to define public higher education in the latter half of the 20th century and believed in education for all. As society goes, he said, so goes the university. But also, as the university goes, so goes society. The progress of knowledge remains so central to the progress of civilization. Our collective progress and prosperity hinge on quality higher education. It is the strongest argument for lifting our universities. The onus is now on all of us, faculty and future faculty, students, parents, elected officials, university presidents, business leaders, and philanthropists, to push for effective answers, to push higher education in the right direction for the good of tomorrow and the good of the world. I trust, though, that together we will see, because I'm the eternal optimist, that America's research universities are powerful, productive, and globally relevant in the 21st century. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Oh, thank you.
Fascinating. You've had many distinguished roles throughout the Academy, and it's lovely to have you here, and we really appreciate it. I'm here to facilitate questions. I obviously have some of my own, so but if maybe I'll start with one of mine, and then we'll roll out to the audience. So your argument about making what we do more visible kind of assumes that people are rational actors in the world, and that presented with data about what it is that we really do in the system, that they will be swayed. Having lived through the 30% drop in the Pennsylvania educational economy, and watching that at Penn State, and watching what Graham Spanier tried to do to respond to that, taking to the airways, taking to the television, it didn't help much. So I'm wondering, what can you say about the kinds of communication strategies that we might be able to employ now that you think would be most effective?
Well, you know, in the sort of a maelstrom of the 2008-9 recession, I mean, you know, it was not the time that we were going to turn people around. I mean, everybody understood that. I've taken the long game, the long view. And I think it's really important for us to try to reach out, you know, not only to go and talk to people, but to listen to what their concerns are. And I think faculty can do this. You know, deans do it, presidents do it. It's the job of presidents now to go out and talk. And it's most important to talk to people who are not necessarily going to agree with you. I mean, I had this very interesting situation when I first went to the University of Michigan. And one of the things that attracted me to Michigan was that it was fighting this Herculean battle in the Supreme Court over affirmative action. And it was, and so I would go everywhere in the state. I talked to churches, I talked to civic groups, I talked to, you know, Kiwanis, Rotary, whatever, any place I could talk. And I understood that people weren't necessarily going to agree with what I had to say. And so I would sort of bring up things that I thought they would be embarrassed to bring up. I wanted to bring it up first so that they would then feel free to talk to me. And so we would have this conversation, and I would listen to them too. And it was a very interesting dialogue. And I think at the end of the day, you know, there's probably only one person in the thousands of people I talked to who really, when it was rude, and you know, we tried to have a dialogue. We tried to understand each other. That's the only way that I know how to do it. But I think you have to create these opportunities. I think you have to be aggressive about it and deliberate about it. And because we talk often to people who are going to, you maybe all of you don't agree with everything I said, but maybe a lot of the people in this room agree with what I said. But I need to be saying this to people who don't agree. Yeah. You know, to legislators, people in Washington. But it's the long game. And I know, and I understand that the decline in support from states has not been because the legislature hates us. That's not it. It's because they've got a cash crunch. They've got a problem. But we need to figure out ways to work with them to show them the value that they can make the decision that it's important to have the investment. And it's hard work.
Absolutely. Questions?
Anybody would?
Oh, come now.
You can ask me anything.
How are you?
I'm good.
I'm Phil Glick. I'm the chair of the Faculty Senate and a pediatric surgeon by night.
Aha. Okay.
My question for you, and there was so much information in that talk, I was trying to absorb it all. At one point you said that the cost of the university costs are keeping pace with the cost of living.
Well, they're low. They're a little bit lower. Yeah.
And I was just wondering the cost to who?
Oh, you're right.
Cost to run the university or cost to our students?
No, it's the cost to run the university. Who pays is the problem. So I mean, we've tracked this, actually. I spent a lot of time at Michigan doing this, tracking what our costs were every year, and it was slightly below the consumer price index. But when the state was withdrawing 35% of its support, then wait a minute, you know, who paid? Well, the parents, you know, our tuition had to go up because we couldn't support it otherwise. So the cost to and running the institution aren't runaway. It's who pays for the education. I mean, we all know the statistics that back in the 70s, the state was paying 70% of the cost, the families were paying 30%. Now it's flipped. You know, in good times, the state is paying 30% and the families are 70%. So who pays the bills has changed.
Yes, I went to Berkeley
and
paid $212 a quarter.
Right.
Wow.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. Well, that's because the state of California was lavish in its support of the you know, they're going through troubles now.
And it was a few years ago.
Yeah. It's okay. Yeah, but it brings up a very important point. And you know, and our universities, from the time that you were in Berkeley to now, and when you think about the infrastructure that we have now that you didn't have at Berkeley, and the scientific equipment, and the this, and the that, I mean, it's, you know, orders of magnitude better. It's more expensive. It's more expensive to run. So, but it doesn't mean that we can't be constantly thinking innovative about how to take out cost. And I had to, you know, going through the Great Recession in Michigan, I'll tell you, that was ground zero. We had 15% unemployment. I mean, it was devastating. And we found ways to take cost out of the system, I will tell you. I mean, my goal was, I said, look, you know, we're doing it under a crisis, but we need to be taking cost out of the system every single year. I don't care whether the good times or bad times, if we don't find a way to run this place more efficiently, you know, we're not going to survive. And I think that's true in a lot of places.
And your comments about return on investment are really important because even though it has gotten more expensive for our students and our families to send their kids here, they do get the money back.
They do. They do. I mean, no question. And they have, you know, when I think about it, when people say, well, what's the value of a college degree? I said, well, number one, it gives you lots of options in life that you don't have if you're a high school. And it doesn't help you if you have a few credits in college. That's not going to give you the payback. If you have a degree, yes, you have a lot of options in life. And that's what we want. I think we all want for our children, is the most options in life. So.
Other questions?
Yes.
Hi, Gwen Thomas. Thank you so much for the talk. I wanted. It seems like there's this tension, right? I think that it's so important to talk about, you know, what the university gives back, right? Mm-hmm. But I also worry about the ways in which that is always put forward in kind of very monetary terms, rather than, for example, larger discussions about democratic citizenry and the ability when I think about what problems are facing the research universities in the future, I think about the inequality among the public land grants versus the Ivy League. I think about the huge inequality now within a university, right, across different disciplines, different, and how that reflects, this kind of pullback away from an investment in the public good as a broader concept.
Yeah. No, I mean, these are the important points, and I tried to, at least touch on that to say that I could reflect back on my own sort of time when I was speaking for the university, and I was using too much of the monetary, because it was always impressive to me how much research we were doing. And, it was great. Well, it isn't the amount of money that it's how you're changing lives, and you need to have the anecdotes, and you need to have the stories about, okay, the University of Michigan developed the first 3D printing tracheal replacement to save a little child who was going to die because he couldn't swallow food. We did that. We had to put it, made with 3D printing thousands of different models of his trachea and found the one that fit, and it's dissolvable so that he will live. That child will have a normal life. I mean, so at some point we need to be talking about the difference that we make in lives and try to stay away from the monetary, though it's hard because there is a return on investment. There is a monetary impact. There is an economic impact of the fact that this university is really making a difference in this community in terms of its employment and the amount of money that it spends and the companies that it can attract. And I was just in your sort of entrepreneur center or innovation where students are kind of taking entrepreneurship courses and they're learning how to do things perhaps they wouldn't before. All that's really, really positive. So it's kind of hard to sort of leave it out, but I know what you're talking about. I mean, one of the hardest things, I think, is to try to understand where people are coming from when you're trying to talk to them about the value of higher education. And so you have to listen really carefully to figure out what their starting point is. Because I've been as guilty as anybody else in starting here when the person's knowledge base may be here. And so we're just kind of talking past each other. So we have to figure out how to make that a little bit more equal. I said when I was at Iowa, one of the things we did, it turned out to be just fabulous. You're probably doing similar things here. I think there's so much innovation going on at universities. But when we used to take the musicians out to the farm communities and have them give concerts and, grain silos and whatever. And the farmers loved it. I mean, they loved the fact that these musicians would come to them and play. And those are things that universities can do at very low cost and build enormous goodwill. So you got to put your thinking cap on and think about how to do that and say, you have all this talent in the university. Is there a way that you can think about sharing it? We used to, when we invited people, musicians, we used to take them, when I was at Kentucky, to the federal prison and have concerts at the prison. I went to one of those one time, and it was so great. It was a Venezuelan group, and there were many people of Hispanic heritage at the prison because of drug crimes that were unfortunate, and they were there. It was one of the most vibrant, wonderful experiences I've ever had with an audience that they just loved this group. And they were interactive, and they were singing and dancing, and it cost us almost nothing from the university to take them to the prison. So I don't know. I know you're probably doing things like that, but I just think it's fabulous to try to share as much as you can, and you win people one person at a time. Yeah.
Chris, please.
Robin called on me as well as you.
Call on you.
No, you call. You do the calling. You do the calling.
I want to follow up on Gwen's question and on the stories you were just telling, because I do think that not only is there a temptation to talk about research and what universities do in terms that are quantifiable because they're easy, but there's also a slide, I think, in American culture now to talk about, especially research, in ways that matter, as you say, to improve lives, in ways that focus almost exclusively on science and medicine or health. Because again, those are the easy ways to think about how lives are improved, because we can pick individual, single, particular examples. Again, it's quantifiable in a way. Whereas what we tend not to do is ever to talk about research in the humanities and in the arts and ways that they improve lives and also potentially create the kind of bridge that can overcome moral disengagement, as you point out, which is so central to the root of the defunding that's occurring, the skepticism about the value of public education, in the sense that we in the humanities are often engaged with thinking through questions that have to do with death and love and what gives us spiritual life in times of crisis and so on and so on, that really matter to everybody regardless of their political affiliation or anything else. And that don't, although it doesn't come down to questions of how the university is sending money back into the community, may touch people in a way that makes them not care about that question quite so much, because they see other kinds of value that are deeper and that are more, anyway, if you would just say something a little more about research in that direction.
Sure.
Thank you.
Well, you know, I think, you know, one of the best arguments there, and I know you see it here, we certainly saw it at where the universities that I was associated with, is how the creative arts actually are an economic impact, positive on the communities, because they bring people. I mean, at the Hancher Performing Arts Center at Iowa, I mean, it was the beacon on the hill. I mean, you know, people from, we would get artists coming there, and people from all over the state would come to those performances, and then they would stay in the hotels, and they would go to the restaurants, and I mean, it just made for a very vibrant culture. So I think we need to be reminding people all the time about the fact that this university here, at University of Buffalo, is a magnet for creative talent. And you know, I had this interesting experience at UVA a couple of days ago where we were celebrating Terry Sullivan's last year at the university, but also sort of the power of women from UVA and what they've done with their lives. And we had a panel with all these CEOs and financial, you know, women who are heads. And you know what they talked about is the impact of the humanities and the liberal arts courses on their career and why that made them successful as CEOs. And I loved it. And I said, oh, there are all these students sitting here listening to these very powerful women saying, well, it was that, you know, creative art course that I took, or that English literature course, that made me what I am today, and it made me be a CEO. I said, yes, you know, that's what they need to hear. So anytime we can reinforce it, it's very important. But the arts are an economic driver for communities. They are for, and you know, and I hate to sort of put it in those terms, but sometimes you have to be able to do that, to say, you know, we're making a huge contribution, and it's an economic argument, but it's also a quality of life argument.
I'm going to push you a little harder, though, because, for example, the things that you're saying that have to do with education and that have to do with performance, I completely agree with in every way. I've had CEOs say to me, too, that their lives have been changed because of taking English literature classes, and this is how they learn how to step out of their own shoes and how to sympathize with other people and how really to think reflectively and so on and so on. But what about research in the humanities, right? Because that's what people really do not understand, right? So research in medicine gives us, you know, cancer, cancer drugs.
I get it. Yeah.
But what the hell does research in the humanities give?
Well, so this, I mean, I guess I got my best sort of example of that, and sort of my sort of aha moment. And though I sort of intellectually knew it in the past, I don't think I saw it quite as viscerally. As when back in 2003, we at Michigan had the invitation from Google to digitize all 8 million volumes of the library. And it was a big deal to decide to do it, because we knew that You know, we had to get us indemnified, so we weren't going to be sued because we knew Google was going to be sued by the publishers. And I went through many, I will tell you, I went into the lion's den with the publishers to explain why this was really good for them and they should want it. And they should have wanted it. They made a big mistake. But nevertheless, what I realized when those volumes started getting digitized is humanities scholars were able to do something that they had never done before. It was stunning. The sort of the ability to search text, the ability to find sort of evolution of thought, of how we came to believe the things that we believe, it transformed the humanities. I believe it absolutely. And so and people can understand that. I mean, that's one of the things of research that they can understand. They can say, you've got 1 million volumes that have something to say. There is no way that a human can go through that. If you've got it all digitized and you're looking for a train of thought, or you can do something, voila, it's a totally different. You know, that may seem like a pedestrian example, but I don't think it is. I think it's very powerful. I used to tell this story about, which is so much fun. Before the Google project, Michigan had collaborated with Cornell, the libraries, to digitize all the printed works in the libraries from 1840 to 1860, and it's called The Making of America was the project. And it was all digitized and put online. And then we had the ability to print, if people could order something from that that's all out of copyright, so you don't have to worry about copyright. So they could order volumes from that digital collection. I will defy you to know what the most popular, and it's been hundreds of thousands of downloads of the copies of the book that we have printed. It's Beekeeping in 1840. It turns out that the art of beekeeping has not changed since 1840. And this turned out to be an incredibly, the bees, right, and we still get hundreds of requests a week for the copies at the library for beekeeping. And I said, you know, for some reason that was just so inspiring to me to think that from 1840 there's this way of doing things that is still relevant today. So I tell people that story is extremely exciting.
So I have one more question of my own. Since I'm sitting here, I'll take the advantage. Okay. So I'm assuming you spend an awful lot of time on the Hill, that there's a large lobbying function in the job that you have. So what do you think is the most important advocacy issue that you're going to bring up there from the AAU? What's the one thing that you really would think is the most important problem that gets solved right now, or the thing that requires most of our advocating energy?
Well, so let me say I have an excellent staff that they are experts at this. I'm not the expert at lobbying, but you know, we sort of developed the strategy. Unfortunately, I think now we're spending most of our time preventing bad things from happening. The tax legislation is sort of top of mind right now because there's so many bad things in it for higher education that we are desperately concerned about it. Anything else that we were very concerned about immigration, and we're still concerned about immigration policy and allowing the talent to come. I mean, I'm serious about this. If we cut off the talent flow, forget it. You know, so that's kind of its. And we don't know what's going to pop up, you know, by a tweet tomorrow. So we are just kind of constantly on guard for the next thing that we have to do. We work very closely with the other higher organizations, APLU, ACE, ASCU. You know, they're the big six that we have in Washington. We work with them. Sometimes it's only AAU things, we go alone. Sometimes we partner with APLU. So it just depends on what the issue is. But we're all sort of there together. We're talking constantly about what we're doing. I was telling a group a little bit earlier today that I'm working with quite a different group and some private foundations that we want to initiate a pretty big program, sort of the Campaign for Science. I said I'm trying to sort of deal with when we tested some of these messages, and our our best test message was the Campaign for American Science. But we know that science is not just American, and so we have this debate about whether we should use the word American or just the Campaign for Science, because it's about science and about evidence and facts. And, you know, just we're out there working hard every day. As are all the university presidents. I know Satish would agree with that. I mean, everybody's working really hard. And we're trying to do what we try to do for our presidents and provost is to sort of have messaging that we are trying to promote so that everybody sort of, and everybody, you know, pretty much agrees about what the issues are today.
Good afternoon. My name is Stephen Dunnett. I'm the Vice Provost for International Education. I'd like to thank you for your very eloquent and spirited defense of international education and keeping our country open. And thank you also for the statements condemning the travel bans and also in support of DACA students. And this is, as you can imagine, very encouraging to us in a rather discouraging time for those of us who work in international education. So we spend a lot of our time telling people overseas that our universities are open and welcoming, and we try to reassure the students and scholars who we are already hosting. But I feel rather discouraged about the lack of influence we seem to have on Washington. And I think a lot of our arguments seem to fall on deaf ears. What advice do you have? I know you're doing good work, and you just said that a few moments ago about working with the other professional associations in Washington. But what can we do here? Do you have any thoughts about that?
Well, you know, I think all of us, you know, have an obligation to keep making clear that this country is totally dependent on international talent. I mean, all you have to do is to look across your faculty and find out the origins of your faculty and where people came from, what they did. And that's been the genius of, it seems like to me, of America, that we've tried to get the best from everywhere. And so I think all of us need to keep talking about it and why important it is, and using whatever anecdotes that we can about it. And you know, I think that's what we have to do. I will tell you that you know, I had this conversation with Terry Sullivan just a few days ago, and she'd come back from China, and she said one of the most discouraging things she heard there was when, you know, the president of China says, he makes an edict, well, everybody lines up and they do what the president says. And so the assumption there is that when the administration here has an immigration ban and we're not going to let people in, that all the universities are going to line up and say, yes, sir. Well, actually, no. That is not what happens in this country. We go to court, we fight, we will fight to the death because we know that it is an existential threat. And so, and our continuing to get that word out, that no, we disagree. This is not what's going to make America globally competitive. We have to keep up the fight, and every one of us has to do it, say it over and over and over again. And make our students feel welcome. I mean, I've had assurances that the Congress is going to deal with the DACA issue. You know, hey, trust but verify. We are in there every time we can get to say, okay, you promised us, where is it? Where is it? Where is it? Because we need it. We need it for the country. I mean, these young people, it's unconscionable that they should feel threatened. And we need to tell them that they are welcome, and we're going to fight every way that we can to have them be able to stay. I think you had somebody back here at the back. You may not be able to see.
Sorry.
Can you see people?
Yes, there we go.
Yeah.
I apologize because I wasn't here at the beginning of your talk, but did you mention the Excelsior program? Did that come up?
No, it did not, but I know about it, and I've asked a lot of people about it here.
Okay, so I was going to pick your brain on it because obviously it's one of the core missions of public institutions is to provide access to underserved populations, and I believe we are the first state to institute a free undergraduate tuition program. Obviously, that ties in with state budgets that you brought up. Have you heard in your travels from other state systems that they're thinking about a similar program? And I was also wondering, in any interactions you have with leadership in private institutions, what their thought process might be with that type of program.
Yeah. So you know, I hear more about, I think, making the first 2 years of college essentially free. I know in Michigan there was a attempt to try to do something like that. I think I've heard about it. Rhode Island, maybe. I'm trying. Georgia had the Hope Scholarship for a long time. That was. It didn't. It started when it started out. But it was for all institutions, not just public. It was different from the Excelsior program. And I think when it started, they were able to pretty much pay the public undergraduate tuition, but it's eroded over time. So there are not many states that are able to do it. I know that California, even though they're going through tough times, they have Cal Grants, which are really good. I mean, California is living in a different world than everybody else. You know, they have more resources than they will admit. And actually, I have to say this to you all, that since the state pays your benefit cost, you got a good deal here in the state of New York. I mean, compared to Michigan. I know it's all comparative, so go there. But I'm encouraged that I do think that this whole issue of affordability, access, making sure that people who are first generation are going to be welcome at institutions, I'm hearing a lot more about that conversation than I did 10 years ago. And so I think it's beginning to penetrate, yeah, we better do something about this. And that, you know, we need to encourage those kind of conversations. And good for New York. So how do private institutions in New York feel? I really haven't talked to people here enough to know. But you know what? Hey, everybody's got to keep innovating. Everybody's got to be attractive. Everybody's got, you know, we base ourselves on being competitive. So go out there and compete. Create something that people want. That's the American way.
Hi, I'm Ken Tripathi in the Office of the Vice President for Research and Economic Development. You gave a convincing description of the cost pressures and the trend of reducing funding for universities. And it doesn't seem like it's going to reverse anytime soon. Do you know of alternative business models being considered by AAU universities that might respond to those cost pressures?
Sure. So here's what I've observed. And different people will have different circumstances depending on where they're located and how much they can interact with industry or whatever, provide special programs. What I have seen is a much ramped up sort of interest in and dependence on philanthropy. So I think that's going to be a trend that just is what it is. I mean, and you know, and I will tell you, my son went to Williams College. And when we went to Williams, many years ago, when we went to Williams College, my husband and I were sitting in a convocation for parents. This is before we dropped him off. And the president of Williams College is telling these students who are all sitting in the front, you are so privileged to be here, you're going to have to pay back, basically. So right now, think about how you're going to pay back. So they inculcate in these students the idea that they are going to contribute, pay it forward when they can. And that's why Williams says 60% of the alums give. At Michigan, I think the number was 12% give back. You know, because we just haven't done that. We haven't thought about that as part of the financial model in public institutions until more recently. We're going to have to think about it. You know, it is our obligation. And I think it's sort of a collective obligation that can help us think cohesively about the fact that, yes, you are getting an individual good being here, but you have to think about the larger community in terms of when you have the resources. And the amount of money that you give doesn't much matter. You give something. And so I think that will change. I think there's a growing emphasis in making sure that the technologies that we develop in the university, I don't know whether those are ever going to make much money, but they may help to attract industries to come to the communities that we live in and help support. I've said long time to businesses, to CEOs, you know, your company really you're getting the product, so you should help with scholarships. You should help pay, because you're employing these young people. And we're doing all the work for you, and you're not contributing anything, and you should. I mean, I'm as hard on them as I am on anybody else. And I just think we need to keep, paying that message. We're all in this together. At Michigan, when we, first of all, we had to take cost out. I mean, I don't think you can do this without taking cost out of the system, and you have to do it without affecting the quality, and that is really hard. This is not an easy job to do, but we need to keep working at it and doing it as best we can. We need to raise a lot more money. We need to make sure that we are doing the tech transfer as well as we possibly can. We need to be making alliances with corporations. We need to be working with foundations. I mean, it's just the whole mix. One of the things that is daunting to explain to people is the funding model of a modern research university is extremely complex. And if you start sort of diluting any part of it, the whole thing can easily collapse. I mean, people used to say to me in the state, when I first went to Michigan, our state allocation was about $368 million a year, and when I left, it was $240 million. So you can see the difference. When people said, well, why don't you just give up the state support and become private? And I said, are you kidding me? Do you know how much of an endowment, unrestricted endowment, I would have to get $240 million? It's about $6 billion. So if I can raise an unrestricted endowment for $6 billion, I'll give up the state support, and I can't do that. So I don't care how little the state support was. It was a little critical piece, and the good thing about the state money is all unrestricted, so you could use it for any purpose. So you have to be a real genius at, moving your money around. You learn how to do that when you're university president. Don't you? Yeah.
Yes, you have to be a
genius.
Mary-Sue, thank you so much for the The conversation is not done. Please join Mary-Sue and others outside at the reception. Thank you very much.